When I was 6, we were poor, but I didn't know it. No television sets showed me other people's lives. No one rich lived on our block. The 30s were the last innocent days of childhood. Costa Mesa was still called Goat Hill. Summer stretched like an open meadow. Days and nights belonged to me and my friends, without much interference from the heavy-handed adults who lived around us. The grandmother didn't like me, although she wouldn't admit it. She took care of me every day while my mother worked, and all the kids on the block thought she was a witch. To be on the safe side, I stayed out of the house as much as possible. Inside was her dark domain. Outside was my own pagan world. My days were my own, spent with Spencer, my beloved red golden retriever, who was my best friend, and Randy, my puny younger cousin. My mother gave Spencer his name because she loved Spencer Tracy. We ran through fields and rolled together down hills, stole away to Back Bay and explored the caves, in spite of dire warnings from the grandmother that we would be killed in a collapse of sandstone. Danger just added to our adventure. At night, I slept with Spencer and confided all my secrets to my best friend. He watched, listened earnestly, and thumped his giant tail on the mattress. He was my comfort and my protector against the grandmother. I often told him about my birthday party, the birthday party I dreamed of. It was our nightly ritual. I can't remember my actual birthdays or presents. I don't remember blowing out candles. On the subject of birthdays, I draw a long, hollow blank. But I told Spencer about the birthday I wanted, the birthday I dreamed of almost daily. At the mention of that make-believe birthday, the old black and white film of my childhood switches to Technicolor, just like that part in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy hits Oz. Here's what I dreamed of. I would have adorable dime store invitations, not homemade ones, but the really good ones. You had to pay $0.25 for 8 of them in a cellophane package. I'd almost worn a couple of them out already at the Newberry's 5 and dime. Every time Spencer and Randy and I pulled the red wagon downtown to pick up Grandma's groceries, I stopped off to look at the birthday invitations. I kept changing my mind about the card. I wanted it to reflect the theme, and I could never make the final decision. I really liked that little white puppy one. He was wearing a red and blue striped birthday hat with his pink tongue hanging out. I explained to Spencer how I'd carefully lettered the names of each of my 8 friends on the envelopes. As long as I was fantasizing, I might as well fantasize 8 friends. I would mail out the invitations so someone who was not invited wouldn't find out and feel the terrible sinking pain of being left out. The next important considerations were food and decorations. Every Saturday, Spencer and I walked downtown to the Costa Mesa Library, past the librarian, the dreaded Miss Conant, to the children's book section. I always wanted the same enchanting, dog-eared book in the section marked Reference Do Not Remove. It was How to Plan Your Children's Parties by Betty Crocker. A coconut cake you could cut a certain way came out resembling my favorite invitation, a little white dog with shredded coconut for curly hair and Hershey's Kisses for eyes. A cornucopia of wrapping paper laid on the plate made it look like he was wearing a birthday hat. For the circus theme, you created a big top tent from the ceiling and taped it. Then you twisted it so it twirled all the way down the birthday table. The cake for this was also red and white, made with animal crackers and Christmas canes. So it looked like the canes were the poles of the carousel that held up the animal crackers. At my fantasy party, the favors by the guest plates were red and white baskets filled with chocolates. All the guests liked me, and they loved Spencer. And the games were fun, and there wasn't any fighting, and the day ended perfectly. I never had this party. I'm not sure if I ever even mentioned to anyone that I wanted it. I guess my imagination failed at the thought of building a circus tent in Grandma's dark house, or dancing for joy with red and white balloons while her gold-framed eyes looked on. This special dream went to bed with me every night. It kept me safe and warm. My birthday dream and Spencer, who stayed alert to warn me of the approach of the grandmother. I drifted off at night to the comforting rhythm of his breathing, the warm weight of his body by my feet. That is until I was 9 and my father came back to Costa Mesa to take us away. My mother asked me, "Shall we go back to him?" "I don't know," I said. "Why is she asking me?" It turned out she wasn't. She'd just talking out loud. She'd already decided to try it again. My father had found work in Bakersfield. We could move right away. And then my father said, Spencer couldn't go. I thought my heart would break. No one would tell me today I couldn't be with my best friend. But when I was 9, a stranger who said he was my father told me I couldn't. And I couldn't because my mother didn't stand up for me. I hated him. I left Spencer with my cousin Randy, although I didn't think he could take care of him. Randy was only 5 and a baby. I gave him endless instructions and he promised, but I knew him. He couldn't even remember to pee in the toilet half the time. On the last day, Spencer wouldn't take his eyes off me. I was afraid he knew, but I couldn't stand to tell him. My father got out of the car and led Spencer into Randy's house. I stayed in the car, my face buried against the back seat. Mother told me Randy would call and tell me how Spencer was once we got in the motor court. I didn't believe her. I knew he would never call. I didn't speak to either one of them all the way to Bakersfield. They acted like they didn't notice, but I knew they did. A year passed. Randy never called. Eventually, I made peace with my father, and I began to get used to him. Things eventually got better for us. After the Long Beach earthquake, my dad found work in Orange County again. The long depression finally ended for my family. In June, we actually had some extra money, so we went to visit the grandmother. I found myself again in the grandmother's house. The first thing I thought about was Spencer. I ran down to Ellis to see Randy, but really to see Spencer. Randy was gone. I asked his mother about Spencer. She looked uncomfortable. "Oh, I'm sure he's around somewhere," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "We couldn't afford to feed him. We had to let the Abbotts have him. You know how Louie always liked him." Louie! I felt sick. I thought I'd throw up. He drowned kittens. Louie wouldn't take care of Spencer. I never liked Louie, that fat, red-faced loudmouth. He didn't deserve Spencer. Louie was a bully and a sneak. I only said, "Where is he?" Ella gave me the address. I went to the Abbott's house. Mrs. Abbott told me they had given Spencer to another couple, but they couldn't get him to stay in their yard. "He just roams the valley now," Mrs. Abbott said. "He visits around. We all take care of him and feed him. He's just fine." I told my parents about it that night at dinner. I'm sure they heard the accusation in my voice. "Joan, you must have known we couldn't take him with us. Spencer couldn't live in an apartment. He'd been used to big yards, rooms to run." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was in no mood for logic. I wanted to hold someone responsible. A couple days later, I thought I saw Spencer in an open field as we were driving to the movie, but my father wouldn't stop. He said we couldn't be sure it was him. The real truth was, he didn't want me to see Spencer again. I ached to see him, but at the same time I was afraid. What if he didn't recognize me? What if he hated me? The last weekend of our vacation, I walked down by the old familiar stream, replaying my old birthday party fantasy. Then I saw a red golden retriever coming down the path. I was pretty sure it was Spencer. I shouted. My heart raced. I shouted, "Spencer, it's me, Spencer!" I shouted, "It's me, boy!" Sure enough, his head went up. He started to run toward me. He was so beautiful. The sunlight caught sparks from his red coat. Lean, more muscular than I remembered, he raced around me in the field, cutting wide circles, delirious. Me too. "Spencer, Spencer!" I shouted. He ran round and round the field. I was laughing. Spencer was barking until we dropped in the grass and hugged each other for pure joy. After a few minutes of hugging and rolling, he trotted alongside me as if I'd just gone out for a walk an hour before and now had come home. I went back to the grandmother's house. My dad said, "We can't keep him." Mother put her hand on his arm. "Just for tonight," she said. My father relented. Spencer and I slept together again. I sneaked him into my bed. In the night, I heard him get up and turn around. He jumped down. His tail thumped the floor. Drifting off to sleep, I heard the familiar rhythm of his breathing and felt safe for the first time in years. The next morning came the agony of more goodbyes. We had to leave him at Grandma's house. A few miles away, I saw Spencer out the back window. He was running his hardest after the car. I could almost feel his heart pounding. "Daddy, Daddy, stop, it's Spencer," I shouted. But my father didn't answer. He pushed down further on the accelerator. Spencer ran even faster. I was afraid he'd never give up and my father would never stop, and I'd be staring out the back window forever and I'd see Spencer die. I started to scream, "Daddy, Daddy, please stop, he's gonna die." Finally, my father pulled off the road. I pushed open the door and waited. In one long bound, Spencer was on the seat beside me. Nobody said anything on the way back to Grandmother's. The only sound was Spencer's painful breathing. I looked down at him and saw his pink tongue hanging out the side of his mouth. I knew his heart would break if we left him again. I cried and begged when we got to Grandmother's, but I was a child. I couldn't win. We went back home to Long Beach in silence. I never saw Spencer again. He was my best friend, and I abandoned him twice. That was many years ago, but sometimes I still have this dream. It's always the same. I'm in the back seat of my parents' car, looking out on the road, and I'm 10 years old. At the same time, I'm Spencer, and I'm running my heart out behind the car. The road hurts my paws from running so hard. The terrible sun blinds me. I can't get my breath, and with every leap I say over and over again, "She doesn't want me. She doesn't want me." My heart feels a pain so sharp I think it will tear itself apart. I sit bolt upright in bed, wide awake. "I wanted you, Spencer, I did." I say it over and over again, but there's no one there to hear me.